you for joining us for week 6 virtual capital connection. We are moving forward through session. As always, we want to thank our sponsors for our weekly virtual capital connection, Advent Health, Polk State College, and the support of Tampa Electric. So we will jump right in. Just a bit of housekeeping as always. Feel free to drop any questions into the Q&A and I will grab those as they come along. So last week we'll do a recap of week 5, and then this week is of course week 6 as we move forward, and then I do have a few federal updates for you as well. And as I remind you every week, the Chamber of Commerce does put out our own legislative priority statement that the Board of Directors approves. And of course, our delegation. So if you are not familiar, our delegation members that are working for us up in Tallahassee. So we had 29 additional bills filed last week, but we have had a lot of movement on bills being passed. And of course, as I mentioned to you, bills being signed. We've had the COVID liability bill that has been signed by the governor. And as I mentioned, so passed and signed, check. And that was our top priority for this legislative session coming off of the year that we've just had. Main Street Fairness, you've heard me talk about this each week. This week, there's an additional update to it. And actually, in the Chamber of Commerce's perspective, makes it even a sweeter deal, if you will. Year over year, pretty much since I started in this job, we have had reducing the business rent tax as a part of our legislative agenda. Florida is the only state that charges sales tax on commercial leases or tax on commercial leases. And so we are glad to see that as they've been doing the budget estimates, they believe that there was going to be some money left over from when they replenished the Unemployment Compensation Trust Fund with the revenues that could come from the online sales tax reform. So there is now a proposal to reduce the business rent tax from 5.5 to 2%, which would be the largest adjustment that's been made. It's been chipped away year over year by a 0.1% or 0.2%, but this is an interesting development from last week. So you see that at this point, this version of this bill has a possibility of being on the House floor tomorrow. And then Visit Florida Tourism Marketing. As I mentioned to you last week, this will probably become a little bit of a call to action. House Bill 675 has stalled on the House side, and that is the one that would allow Visit Florida to carry forward any unexpected appropriations to succeeding fiscal years, and then would remove the sunset provision so that we wouldn't have to have the fight of whether they should exist or not every single year. And then for those of you, which we have several economic developers on the line, the QTI legislation has also stalled in the House, and it's in appropriations in the Senate. So that is something that there also may be a call to action that you'll see from me in terms of communicating with our legislator, the importance of funding Enterprise Florida with as many errors in the quiver that makes sense for our state, as well as Visit Florida moving forward. And in relation to Visit Florida, I have mentioned to you all about this bill, 1429. It was referred to the House calendar after last week. It was postponed on the agenda for the Senate and the Community Affairs. But this bill would be one of the first statewide bills that would allow for the chipping away or the repurposing of tourist development taxes at the local level. And this kind of goes into the theme of resiliency and investments in coastal communities, but is something that we have always felt that tourist development tax needs to be protected towards Visit Florida. It's been chipped away at a small amount in specific communities that are smaller communities, except during certain seasons like spring break, to help with police and fire and those sorts of emergency resources. But this would be a different use for that bill. So week 6 is budget week. So on the House and floor, they have, of course, as we mentioned last week in more detail, the House proposal is $97 billion. Senate proposal has $95 billion. And of course, the House does include some of that stimulus funding in their projections. So bills are watching only highlighted where there were updates last week passed in the House on the cottage food industry. And then residential property insurance was placed on third reading on that Senate bill there. But you'll see no updates on those other bills that I've mentioned to you week over week. Beverage law, which as I mentioned would allow more leniency on to-go containers, that was added to the second reading and the House calendar. And then the student financial aid that we've talked about every week, the heavily amended version is on the special order calendar, but for the Senate side, but no movement in the House at this point in this particular realm. On the Florida Chamber call yesterday, they basically said for it to go anywhere on the House side, it would likely have to go under a larger education bill at this point. And then no movement on film incentives or craft distilleries last week. And then election laws, I mentioned these to you as well. Both legislative chambers have bills that try to tighten up the election, although most people would wholeheartedly agree Florida did an excellent job, especially in comparison to the rest of the country with managing our election in 2020. But there is some movement on those. Senate Bill 90, which is to eliminate drop boxes entirely, is now in the final committee rules on final committee, which is rules on 4-6. So we continue to watch those bills closely. So this week, the Senate has 2 scheduled sessions, tomorrow and on Thursday, as well as the House. So before I move on to federal updates, I want to see if Chad Davis, who is in Senator Stargell's office, wants to give us any particular updates there. So Chad, I did elevate you to panelist if you want to provide any particular updates. I know last week was a short week, so there wasn't as much movement on different things. But if you would like to provide any updates, I will turn it over to you.
Hey, good morning. Sure.
Good morning.
So yes, we are in the middle of our budget week. The Senate will take up their budget. The Senate and the House both will take up their budgets on the floors tomorrow, and we'll hopefully vote those out. I don't know if the voting, if they'll roll it to third reading tomorrow, or if they'll wait and do that later in the week. But we will have, hopefully by the end of this week, both the Senate and the House budgets. We are still waiting the budget estimating conference numbers to come out, which I think come out tomorrow, and that will give us an idea of what our revenue will look like coming up, which could give us, well, it will give us a better picture of the money that we have available. And when we go into conferencing, which usually happens during week 8, I think we're still on schedule for that, might even happen a little bit earlier. We'll be able to take those numbers into consideration as we try to come together and produce our final budget. So so far everything's moving according to as planned. The one thing I would point out to start watching is I think last week I'd mentioned that the substantive committees were done meeting, but surprise, we have one this afternoon that was added to the schedule late last week actually, and we will be taking up, among other bills, a bill dealing with social media that is a priority of the governor's. So some of these things that aren't moving, if you're wondering if they're dead already, if it's a priority to the leadership or the governor, they can still come back. These committees can still pop up on the calendar. So I wouldn't count anything as completely dead, especially if it's something that you might have heard about in the news.
Absolutely. And if it was that particular bill that was actually kind of plucked out of where it was stalled and moved forward, but we're seeing that there's a data privacy bill discussion that obviously has been making the news as well, and has had a lot of back and forth with the governor's office and the business community, at least from the Florida Chamber perspective, on trying to take out some provisions or modify some provisions that were believed to be onerous or difficult from the business community perspective. So there's a lot of back and forth on that. So the social media bill that is being discussed this afternoon, Chad, is that the bill primarily around that got a lot of media play in terms of how the social media companies can, is it around using your data? Is it around how they can remove you and, those types of things?
That's a good question. I haven't actually looked at the bill myself. I know that it was targeting the big tech companies and what they can and can't do within the state of Florida. And I think it deals more with how they deal with speech and blocking users.
Mhm.
I'm sure it's this governor is very concerned about the way some of the censorship has taken place on the big social media platforms. I'm actually going to be working on that all day. I didn't get a chance to do it over the weekend due to the holidays, but we will be in the middle of that this afternoon. So I will have more of an update for you on that next week.
Okay, great, great. Yeah, that's when those bills were first introduced, I was interested in that in terms of if Florida makes decisions on this in particular, you obviously have nationwide companies and how they deal with, well, this is the way it is in Florida, but how is it in the other 49 states? So obviously, this is Katie Worthington's projection, but these are to create a larger national debate around it, and then potentially how the federal government or the Supreme Court or whomever kickstarts that conversation in terms of national reform as well. So those will be interesting to watch because those will get a lot of discussion in the media, I'm sure, as those things move for the process. So
Sure.
very good.
And also, I just pulled it up, so I can give you just a real quick on that.
Sure.
This is a proposed committee bill, which means we haven't seen it anywhere in the House and the Senate yet. We didn't even have language until it dropped this weekend. So I just pulled it up. The bill analysis is out, and it's going to establish a violation for social media deplatforming of a political candidate, and requires that social media platforms to meet certain requirements when they restrict speech by users. That's exactly what it's doing. And you're right. This is part of a broader debate. Our governor is very popular around the rest of the country. A lot of people are looking to him for leadership in some of these issues, and it's kind of it's kind of the answer to what some of these companies are doing in other states, where they're threatening to pull out their business if certain bills pass. Well, there are things that we can do as well to answer some of the actions of these big companies. So I don't know how far this will go, but I know that it will be something that will lead to a national discussion. And it was something that nobody really expected because the bill didn't exist until this weekend.
Yeah,
So,
that particular bill, absolutely.
yes. And I
That'll be.
expect to see more of this going forward.
Yeah, it'll be an interesting, certainly larger national debate in terms of private company rights versus public forums and things of that nature. So it's a debate for our time, if you will. At 2021, we wouldn't have imagined these debates happening. Well, even this weekend, as we sat around the Easter table having discussions of how different Facebook is from 2004, when you could only have a .edu address, like you and I probably had to get on to these platforms. You had to be a college student versus how social media has progressed through the years. So it's needed debate, but it'll be interesting how it moves forward and how they balance, business rights as well as freedom of speech rights and all those things going together. So I'm certainly glad I'm not writing that legislation and debating as it goes forward. So Chad, thank you so much. Is there anything else before I move on to some federal updates?
No, I think that's about it for now. Next week we'll see where we're at. I expect a lot of surprises to happen. We're kind of at that point where everything changes on a daily basis. Things are making the news. I mean, we had the issue with the reservoir of the weekend. We're taking care of that in the budget. There's an amendment that's going to add some money to help shore that up. We did increase affordable housing funding, or we will be increasing that. That's an amendment that's going to the budget as well. Up to, I think, $200 million, which is more than what we've normally done for that. It's not as much as the full funding with the trust fund, but it is definitely a major improvement from where we were at 140 million. So yeah, just this is the time when things really start happening, and maybe next week I'll have a lot more to share.
Absolutely. One thing that the Manatee County crisis kind of underscores as well, and it's weird that this is your first, or was my first thought as this happened over the weekend, but we all remember when there was the algae blooms and the red tide, and this wasn't that long ago, a couple summers ago, and how tourism was so negatively impacted on the Gulf because of, obviously, you couldn't go in the water and there were issues at the beach. And of course, this story, rightfully so, was a national headline all weekend. I mean, it was on the news all weekend. So it even underscores more the tie-in to why tourism marketing and the role that Visit Florida plays in crisis communications when it comes to tourism marketing is so important, because people might not realize if it happens in Manatee County and Florida, they think it impacts all of Florida and how that impacts the entire state. So it underscores even more so the importance of having an agency that's out there speaking on behalf of the state when it comes to tourism as well. So that's my soapbox on that. All right, very good. All right, I will, Chad, thank you so much. As always, appreciate you being so engaged with us on these calls every week. It's really a pleasure. Thank you, sir.
No, the pleasure's all mine. Thank you.
Thanks. All right. So moving forward with some federal updates, and I'm going to tell you the truth on this. I snagged some slides from the Florida Chamber just to make it a little bit faster of an update for you on these. So these are the opinions of the Florida Chamber, and our board has not necessarily taken a position on these yet, but key federal issues that they are watching. Obviously, the stimulus package has passed. I have additional information on the infrastructure package. And then, of course, those of you that might be in need of second draw PPP, that deadline has been extended for PPP loans through May 31st. And obviously, this is a long list of things that are being watched at the federal level in terms of how they could impact Florida business. On the infrastructure package, because we're going to be hearing about this a lot in the media, these are the components of the package itself. And what you'll hear is how broad the package is. As you can see, there's monies in there for affordable housing, for workforce development, for different things of that nature. Where it's a sticking point with the Florida Chamber, with the U.S. Chamber that put out a statement on this yesterday, is how they intend to pay for it. So there is discussions of a corporate tax hike, just a lot of impact on businesses when it comes to this. And so that is an area where you're going to see a lot of vocalization from business groups in terms of how this package is paid for, and to ensure that it's not punitive on the business community. And just a deeper dive from the Florida Chamber's perspective, as they point out, this is the beginning of this process and not the end. So it's been laid out on the table, and this is where the discussions begin on this. So proposed tax increases, of course, they do not want to see these on individuals or on businesses, and believe there's better ways to pay for this infrastructure. What's interesting is while this is broad, some people on the left don't think it's broad enough. Obviously, people on the right think it's too broad. So we'll probably see a narrowing of this bill as it comes further down to fruition. And there is, of course, discussion, as we've seen, as what happened with the American Rescue Plan, in terms of how a bill like this would get passed, and whether it could be passed, whether any Republicans would come to decide to vote for the bill on the Senate side, or whether it is done through the same reconciliation process that was done for that. And that would be a kind of an interesting thing to see as the House or as the Senate parliamentarian. Normally that only happens once a year, from what I'm reading and understanding. You kind of get that card in your pocket once a year. So to use it again would be interesting, unprecedented, whatever word you kind of want to use for that. So watching that closely, we'll continue to get updates on that every Monday. And then, of course, our calls to action from the U.S. Chamber and their analysis of how this could impact business. So more to come on that. But as I said, it's at the beginning phases. All of the interest groups are putting in their different takes on it. And then one other thing on the PRO Act, as we've discussed this, there is a call to action from there hasn't been any movement on it yet in the Senate, but there is a call to action this week from the U.S. Chamber, which makes me think that they're anticipating some movement or some discussions on that potentially moving forward. Of course, it's passed the House. So we'll continue to watch that. Our board has not taken a specific position on the PRO Act, which we normally don't get involved in federal issues, but we will continue to watch this pretty closely because it would change the way Florida does business and the way employers do business in Florida. So with that, I am going to pause for a moment and open it up for any questions that you may have from the group. If you have any bills that you are watching, as I say every week, that we did not mention, please, please, please let me know. It may not be that I just didn't mention it on this call, but we are watching it, or that it's been filed and I'm not aware of it. So I try to stay on top of what's being filed, but as Chad mentioned, things are moving very quickly right now. This is going to be a fast and furious week with budget discussions. We are watching the budget, of course, watching it closely with the appropriation requests that we have been supporting for Polk State College, for Florida Poly, and how that impacts, as I mentioned last week, as of last week's version of the budget, the House side had some significant cuts to Polk State College. And so we certainly want to continue to watch that going forward. So if you have any questions, drop them in the Q&A. Otherwise, we're going to keep this call, as I like to say, about 20 minutes long. So we will pick back up again next Tuesday for our Week 7 virtual capital connection. Again, thank you to our sponsors, Advent Health, Polk State College, with the support of Tampa Electric. Thank you all so much and have a fabulous day.